Chosen one, stop for a moment and pay close attention because something has changed in the unseen world that has to do with your name. This is not a normal message, and the fact that you are hearing these words right now is not a coincidence. Heaven has a way of breaking into the ordinary just when the truth is about to come out. Anointed one, for a long time, you carried a story about yourself that was written by someone else's lies. Because you wouldn't do what your spirit knew was wrong, you were called the difficult one, the black sheep, and the one who caused problems. And while others told stories about you, heaven was quietly keeping track of what really happened to you. But things are different now. A veil has begun to lift in the last few hours. The same God who says in Ecclesiastes that there is a time for every purpose under heaven has come to the point where things that were hidden can no longer stay that way. A family member is beginning to see what was once concealed, and the weight of that realization is shaking their heart. Chosen one, you may have felt a strange release in your spirit lately, as if a weight you have been carrying for years is finally letting go. Stay with this message. Things happening around your family right now are not random. It is divine vindication that is starting to show up. Chosen one, there is a reason the atmosphere around your life has begun to feel different lately. A heavy stone that used to press against your chest is starting to lift, and even if you can't fully explain it, your spirit knows that something has changed. For a long time, you carried a weight that no one around you seemed willing to acknowledge. You walked into rooms where people stopped talking and looked through you as if they already knew who you were without ever listening to your heart. You know that feeling, anointed one, the strange ache of being discussed in places where you were never invited, the quiet pain of realizing that the story being told about you did not match the truth you lived every day. You lay awake many nights wondering how the story got so messed up and how the people who shared your blood could see you through such a distorted lens. But you need to know right now that heaven never forgot the truth. There were times when you felt like you were the only one who could see your own honesty. You tried to explain yourself, but your words seemed to bounce off walls of assumption, so you finally gave up on explaining. You stopped fighting back, you carried your pain in silence and learned to speak to God about things you could no longer say to people. I know that season well, chosen one. I remember sitting in a quiet room after everyone else had gone home and asking God why the truth sometimes takes so long to get to me while lies seem to come so quickly. It feels like injustice has the last word in those times. But heaven has its own time, and the God who sees in secret never leaves a story unfinished. It's not just emotional stress or family disagreements that have been going on around you. There has been a spiritual plan at work, a pattern that makes you responsible for every fight. Your name was always connected to any family problems that came up. When feelings got high in the room, people quietly pointed at you. A label started to form around you over time. Maybe they called you too intense, too sensitive, too difficult to understand. Perhaps they whispered that something about you was unstable, but they didn't realize that the discomfort they felt around you had very little to do with how you acted. It had to do with the light you carried. Chosen one. When someone doesn't want to be part of a dysfunctional group, they show everyone else in the room what they are doing wrong. And mirrors have a strange effect on people who are trying to hide things from themselves. Some people will see that reflection and decide to change. Some people will think the mirror is the problem. A lot of you who are watching know how that feels. You tried to be honest about things that were hurting the family, but all of a sudden you were the one who was causing trouble. You set healthy limits, but people saw those limits as rebellion. You didn't want to act like everything was fine, and all of a sudden you were called the troublemaker. But heaven has been watching this whole thing, and the time of quiet watching is coming to an end. Your spirit has been feeling the beginning of exposure lately. A family member has started to see what was previously hidden, maybe through a conversation that was never meant to reach the surface, a message that was accidentally revealed, or a moment of divine clarity that came in the middle of the night. And when the veil lifts like that, it is not usually a pleasant experience. Truth comes with a lot of weight. It makes people think about memories they thought they understood wrong. It causes them to replay moments they dismissed before. That family member is now looking back on your relationship with new eyes. They are thinking about times when you tried to explain yourself but were cut off. They are recalling the times when you stepped away from gatherings, not because you wanted distance, but because you needed peace. They are starting to understand that you were carrying burdens they never bothered to ask about while they were listening to whispers about you, and as those thoughts start to pile up, something heavy starts to happen in the heart. The conviction begins to grow. Chosen one, the tears you see from them are not small feelings, they are the sound of a conscience coming to life. When someone suddenly realizes they believed a lie about someone who cared about them, it hits them like a wave. They start to wonder things they never thought about before. How did I miss this? Why did I believe that story so easily? Why didn't I look into this situation more? That's when the structure of the lie starts to fall apart. For a long time, a certain voice may have been changing the way people feel about your name. There may have been a family member who always seemed to know things about you. They seemed worried, but they always found a way to make you doubt them. They acted like they were just the calm observer, the neutral messenger, and the one who was just sharing what they had heard. But behind the calm face, something else was going on: division. This has been a pattern in families for a long time. One person learns how to put themselves in the role of interpreting what other people do. They take on the role of storyteller. They filter events through their own perspective and distribute those interpretations to others until their version becomes accepted as truth. And once that pattern is set, the whole family dynamic starts to revolve around the story they made. But what happens when that story starts to fall apart? What happens when someone suddenly sees proof that goes against everything they thought? Chosen one, you are at the point where a long-held illusion starts to fall apart. The person who used to tell those stories about you is now seeing parts of reality that don't fit the old story anymore, and the more they look at those pieces, the more uncomfortable the truth gets. They are realizing that the information they trusted may have been affected by jealousy, insecurity, or fear. They are starting to understand that the person who talked about you the most confidently may have been trying to protect their own image the whole time. They find it hard to accept that realization. Pride resists it, ego fights it. But truth has a way of continuing to rise once it has been uncovered. It begins as a soft whisper in the mind, then it grows into a question that refuses to go away, and eventually, it becomes a realization that changes everything. The Spirit of God is letting that realization sink in right now. The person who once nodded along with accusations about you is starting to see the pattern that was hidden beneath the surface. They are putting together things that didn't seem to be related before. They are recognizing that the person who criticized you the most was often the one creating conflict behind the scenes. They are remembering conversations where details did not quite add up, and then, all of a sudden, the whole picture changes. What used to seem like your problem now seems like manipulation. What used to sound like worry now feels like control. What used to seem like harmless gossip is now showing itself to be a way to keep people apart. Chosen one, heaven has let this moment happen because the time of distortion can't go on forever. Even the most carefully planned stories fall apart when God says it's time for the truth to come out. The same God who said through the Gospel of Luke that nothing hidden will stay hidden is now making that promise come true in your life. And the first sign that truth is rising is not celebration, it is tears. When someone finally sees what they missed, the weight of that knowledge can break their heart, and what's happening in that heart right now is just the start. Chosen one, when someone who used to not understand you starts to see the truth, it's not a quiet time, it's scary, it shakes the ground under everything they thought they knew. That family member who is crying is not just responding to one new piece of information. In front of their eyes, a whole system of belief is falling apart. Memories that used to mean one thing are now showing them something else. Conversations that used to sound like proof against you are now showing signs of being manipulated. This is the hard part of waking up. And you need to know something very important right now. Anointed one, heaven doesn't often show half-truths when it starts to show them. The Holy Spirit starts to play back the tape of history in a person's head. They start to remember things that happened years ago, but this time the fog has cleared. The situation is clearer. The voice that used to sound trustworthy now sounds like it could be lying. The details that used to seem innocent now seem planned. That family member is thinking about things they used to ignore right now. They are remembering the way certain conversations about you always seemed to happen when you were not present to speak for yourself. They are remembering that the same person who told them about you was often the one who caused problems in other relationships as well. They used to see only random events, but now they are starting to see patterns. Chosen one, when a lie lasts for a long time, it's usually because people keep saying it. The same story is told over and over until it seems like the truth. That's how lies take hold in families. One voice whispers doubt, and another voice agrees with it. Soon, the whole atmosphere starts to show the distortion. Soon, no one will even remember where the story began. But the nature of truth is different. Truth may take a long time to get there, but when it does, it has a weight that lies can't handle. And that's exactly what's going on right now. This family member is starting to understand where the story that used to shape their opinion of you came from. They are starting to see that the person who talked about your flaws the most was often projecting their own fears and insecurities onto you. This realization makes them very sad because they now understand something they didn't before. Even though they believed the accusations against you, you still loved them from a distance. You were praying for their health while they were talking about you, while they were doubting your intentions. You were carrying things they couldn't see. That realization is heavy. Chosen one. It's the kind of moment that makes someone sit in silence and think about what they did over and over again. They start asking themselves difficult questions. Why did I not ask them directly? Why did I think the worst? Why did I believe what someone else said instead of listening to what they said? But even this painful thought has a reason for being, because conviction is often the first step toward healing. The tears you see from this family member are not just sadness, they are the first steps toward change. When a person's conscience wakes up, it makes room for the truth to finally grow. You also need to know that what you went through wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was part of a spiritual pattern. Throughout history, people who carry clarity and conviction often become targets for projection. When someone refuses to participate in unhealthy dynamics, It forces others to confront realities they would rather avoid. Sometimes the easiest way to get away from that pain is to blame the person who brought it up. You were never supposed to take that blame. You were the only one who would act like everything was fine when it wasn't. That courage may have made others uncomfortable, but it also made you a catalyst for change, and now heaven is letting that change start. The person who used to turn people against you is starting to lose control of the story. Their differences are starting to show. The little things that used to seem unimportant are now making a pattern that can't be ignored. This is why the mood around the situation is different. The energy of the whole environment changes when lies start to lose their power. You may even feel the change in your own body. Chosen one. Some of you have felt a strange release of stress lately. Your shoulders feel less heavy. It feels like you're breathing more deeply. You used to feel a lot of pressure when you walked into certain places, but that's starting to go away. That's not what you think. Your spirit is physically responding because it knows that the burden of false accusation is being lifted. You carried the emotional weight of what other people thought of you for years. You knew that people had already talked about you when you walked into a room. Even though no one said anything, you could feel the judgments in the air. That kind of setting makes things feel heavy in a way that's hard to put into words. But that heaviness can't stay once the truth starts to come out. The same family member who used to listen quietly to accusations is now seeing those accusations in a whole new way. They are starting to see that the person who seemed most worried about your behavior was often the one who caused the most trouble. And the more they think about that realization, the more obvious the pattern becomes. The enemy thought that if he could cut you off from your own family, he could make your life less important. One of the oldest ways to hurt people who have a purpose is to make them feel alone. It's easier to silence someone's voice if you can make them think that they are alone, that no one understands them, and that everyone is against them. But heaven has a way of undoing what darkness tries to do. What once seemed like rejection is now showing itself to be protection. What used to feel like being left behind is now seen as a time when God was protecting your heart while the truth slowly came out. And right now, that truth is knocking on the door of a conscience that can't ignore it anymore. Chosen one. What is happening in that family member's heart right now is more than just regret. It's the slow, painful realization that comes when someone realizes they were wrong about something. This kind of realization doesn't come quietly. It moves through the mind like a storm, bringing back memories that were buried and forcing them into the light. They start to think about times they used to ignore. The things you said that used to sound defensive now sound true. The distance you put between you and someone else that used to look cold now looks like self-defense. You must understand something, Anointed One. When a person finally sees the truth after years of believing a distortion, their heart goes through a kind of spiritual shaking. Their pride begins to crumble. The certainty they once carried about the situation disappears, and in its place comes humility. That is why the tears are flowing, not because they suddenly feel sorry for themselves, but because they are recognizing the depth of what you carried while they misunderstood you. Right now, they are remembering the times you tried to explain yourself but were quickly dismissed. They are remembering the look in your eyes during family gatherings when you sensed that something was wrong but no one would say it out loud. They are recalling moments when you stepped away quietly instead of arguing, moments that once looked like withdrawal but were actually acts of dignity. Chosen one, there is something powerful about the kind of silence you maintained. It was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of restraint. You knew that defending yourself against a story already accepted by the crowd would only create more chaos, so you carried the weight quietly and placed the situation in the hands of God. That decision may have felt lonely at the time, but heaven saw every moment of restraint. There is a verse that many people quote when they are facing injustice, and it comes from the book of Isaiah 54, where it declares that no weapon formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against you in judgment shall be condemned. Most people imagine that condemnation happening through confrontation. They imagine a dramatic moment where the truth is shouted from the rooftops, but often heaven condemns the lie in a quieter way. It allows the truth to reveal itself inside the conscience of the very people who once believed the accusation. Instead of you defending yourself, the evidence begins to rise around them until they cannot ignore it anymore. That is exactly the stage you are entering now. The family member who is awakening to the truth is starting to recognize the pattern that existed around your name. They are noticing that the same individual who criticized you often seemed to benefit from the division they created. They are remembering subtle comments that once sounded like concern but now feel like manipulation. And the more they examine those memories, the clearer the pattern becomes. Chosen one. There is a reason this realization feels so intense for them. It is because they are discovering that they participated, whether knowingly or unknowingly, in a narrative that wounded someone who loved them. That kind of awareness can make a person feel sick to their stomach. It creates a deep sense of responsibility. But do not despise those tears. They are part of the healing process. When the heart breaks open like this, it creates space for repentance. The person who once believed the story about you is now beginning to understand the cost of that belief. They are seeing how their silence may have allowed the narrative to grow. They are recognizing how easily they trusted someone else's interpretation instead of seeking the truth directly from you. And yet, even in this painful realization, there is a quiet miracle unfolding, because the same tears that reveal regret also prepare the ground for restoration. Chosen one. Heaven is not only exposing deception, it is also softening hearts. The person who once looked at you through suspicion is now beginning to see you through compassion. They are realizing that while they were questioning your motives, you were still carrying love for them. While they were listening to whispers about you, you were quietly praying that one day the truth would surface. That kind of love leaves a mark on the conscience. It cannot be easily forgotten. Now something inside them is shifting. The walls that once separated you are beginning to crack. The certainty they once held about the situation has dissolved, and in its place comes a question they cannot escape. What if we misunderstood them all along? That question is the doorway to everything that comes next. And once that door opens, the truth will continue to move forward until the entire story is rewritten. Chosen one. When truth finally enters a situation that has been ruled by misunderstanding for years, it does not just correct a small detail, it rearranges the entire landscape. The family member who is waking up to reality is now standing in a place where their past looks completely different from the way they once remembered it. What they thought was your rebellion now appears as courage. What they once called distance now looks like protection. The silence they once interpreted as stubbornness now feels like grace. You must understand that this kind of awakening is both humbling and overwhelming. Imagine suddenly realizing that someone you quietly judged was actually carrying burdens you never asked about. Imagine remembering the times they tried to explain themselves and realizing you were too distracted by someone else's narrative to listen. That kind of realization does not simply pass through a person's mind, It settles into the heart like a weight that demands change. Right now, that family member is connecting the dots. They are seeing the pattern that once hid beneath the surface of everyday life. Every time you moved closer to healing the family dynamic, someone seemed to create a new crisis around your name. Every time you tried to build trust again, whispers of suspicion appeared out of nowhere. The pattern was not random, it was strategic. Chosen one. There are people who carry a spirit of division without even realizing the damage they caused. They become comfortable controlling the narrative in a family, shaping how people see one another. Over time, they learn how to present themselves as the voice of reason while quietly planting seeds of doubt about others. It is a subtle kind of influence, one that grows slowly until the entire atmosphere begins to reflect it. But deception always carries one weakness: it cannot survive exposure. And that is exactly what is happening now. The person who once carried that influence is beginning to lose their grip. Their words no longer land the same way. Their explanations are starting to sound inconsistent. The stories that once felt convincing are now revealing cracks that cannot be ignored. Chosen one. When a lie survives for a long time, people become accustomed to it. It begins to feel normal, like part of the environment. But once the truth shines light into that environment, everything shifts. The same story that once seemed believable now feels strange. The same accusations that once sounded convincing now feel exaggerated. This is the moment when the structure of deception begins to collapse, and you may be sensing that collapse even in subtle ways. Perhaps you have felt a strange calm lately, as if something in the air has changed. Maybe the constant pressure you once felt around certain family members has started to ease. That is not coincidence. Your spirit is recognizing that a shift has begun in places you cannot yet see. Chosen one. Heaven has been working behind the scenes in ways that were invisible to you. There were conversations you never heard. Moments when the Holy Spirit stirred questions in someone's heart. Moments when details surfaced that could no longer be ignored. Piece by piece, the truth has been assembling itself like a puzzle, and now that puzzle is starting to form a clear picture. The family member who is awakening is beginning to see that the person they trusted to interpret your character may have been acting from jealousy or insecurity. They are noticing how often your successes were minimized, how often your boundaries were interpreted as disrespect, how often your words were twisted to create tension. And once someone begins to see that pattern, they cannot unsee it. Chosen one. The reason this moment matters so much is because the enemy believed isolation would weaken you. The strategy was simple. If you could be separated from the people who shared your bloodline, your voice would become easier to ignore. If the narrative about you could be controlled, your influence would slowly fade from the family dynamic. But the enemy underestimated something powerful: endurance. You endured the misunderstandings. You endured the accusations. You endured the loneliness that comes from being misrepresented. And through all of it, you kept your heart from becoming bitter. That decision alone changed the outcome of this entire story, because bitterness would have confirmed the lie. Instead, you carried your pain quietly and allowed God to become your defender. You placed the situation in His hands even when it felt unfair. And now heaven is responding to that faith in a way you could not have orchestrated yourself. The person who once believed the accusation is now becoming a witness to the truth. They are beginning to see you not through the lens of someone else's story, but through the evidence of your character. They are noticing the consistency in your life, the quiet strength you carried, the patience you showed even when the situation did not deserve it. and that recognition is beginning to break something open inside them. Chosen one. This is the turning point where misunderstanding begins to transform into respect. The same person who once doubted you is now beginning to realize that the strength they overlooked in you may have been the very thing holding the family together. And when that realization fully settles into their heart, it will change the way they speak about you from this day forward. Chosen one. What your family member is experiencing right now is more than a change of opinion. It is a deep confrontation with reality. When the veil lifts from someone's eyes, they do not simply adjust their perspective, they begin to feel the full weight of the time that was lost. They start remembering the holidays where tension lingered in the air and no one spoke about it. They recall the family gatherings where your absence was quietly explained away with a story that now feels incomplete, and suddenly they realize something painful. The distance that formed between you was not inevitable, it was made. This understanding brings on a kind of sadness that most people don't expect. They are not just sad about the misunderstanding, they are sad about the years that went by while that misunderstanding was going on. They are thinking about the moments when you might have needed support but instead received suspicion. They are thinking about the times they could have asked you directly what was going on but chose to believe what someone else said instead, and that awareness starts to change their heart. Chosen one. When truth finally gets into a person's mind like this, it makes them want to know more. They want to know how everything happened. They start to think about the conversations that changed how they saw you in the past. They remember how some phrases were said over and over again until they started to sound like facts. They figured out that the person who acted like a messenger was really in charge of the story. What used to seem like harmless comments now seems like manipulation. They are starting to see that whenever you and the family tried to make peace, someone would quietly bring up doubt again. Someone said something about your intentions, asked about your loyalty, or brought up a time when you were misunderstood in the worst way possible. They thought each little comment didn't matter at the time, but now they see how those comments built a wall brick by brick. Chosen one. This is when a person starts to see how division works. They know that the fights in the family didn't happen on their own, they were grown. Someone fed the environment with doubt until it became the language that everyone spoke, and when that thought sinks in, it changes everything. Your family member is now looking at the person who made that story in a different way. They are starting to see that their actions don't always match up. The concern that once seemed real now seems rehearsed. The sympathy they used to show for what you did now seems planned. The mask that used to look real is starting to fall off. When a mask falls off, it shows more than just the face underneath. It shows the reason that was hidden all along. Chosen one. Jealousy can look like concern when it wants to. In families, it can show up as quiet resentment and subtle comparisons. When someone feels that another person has favor, influence, or spiritual clarity, it can make them feel insecure, which is hard to admit. Some people try to control the story about the person who makes them feel insecure instead of being honest about it. But God has a way of showing people what they think are hidden motives. The family member who is waking up is starting to realize that a lot of the bad things people say about you may not be true, but rather out of insecurity. They are thinking about the times when people downplayed your successes or called your boundaries arrogant. They are seeing how the things that made you strong were seen as flaws, and now the whole story looks different. You, chosen one, need to understand how important this moment is spiritually. The enemy thought that if he could keep you alone for long enough, the misunderstanding would last forever. He thought the story would become something that couldn't be changed, but heaven won't let lies rule forever. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus says that nothing hidden will stay hidden and nothing secret will stay secret. That truth isn't just pretty words, it is a principle that comes to life. Lies can go a long way, but the truth always gets to the same place, and when it comes, it brings clarity that can't be taken away. Your family member is starting to see the good things in your life that they didn't notice before. They see that you are always the same person and that you were patient, even when things weren't fair. They are starting to understand that the things people said about you were not true. That realization makes a big difference, because when the facts about a person's life don't match the story about them, the story eventually falls apart. Chosen one. This is the point at which belief starts to become respect. The same person who used to question your motives is now starting to admire how you dealt with the situation. They see that you could have fought back hard, but you chose to hold back. They see that you could have left in anger, but you kept carrying love in silence. And that kind of strength makes an impression that will last forever. The family member who used to believe the story about you is now in the uncomfortable but sacred space where truth replaces assumption. They are starting to realize that the person they thought needed to be corrected was actually the one who had the most knowledge, and that understanding is setting the stage for something that once seemed impossible. Restoration. Chosen one. Restoration doesn't start when someone realizes the truth. The process of restoration starts when that truth sinks in deeply enough to change how someone thinks about the past. Your family member is standing in that exact spot right now. Their mind is no longer defending the old story. Instead, their heart is beginning to examine it honestly. When the heart finally opens up like that, humility comes in. Being humble is a powerful thing. Anointed one, it is the ground where real change starts to happen. Your family member is now going over times they didn't think were important. They are thinking about times when you spoke softly while other people yelled. They are remembering how patient you were when people made accusations against you. They are starting to understand that you often chose to be quiet when everyone else wanted to argue, and all of a sudden, that silence looks very different. What used to look like weakness now looks like self-control. What used to feel like distance now feels like growth. They are starting to get that the strength you had wasn't loud, but it was steady, and when people finally see it, steady strength has a way of leaving a mark on them. I have seen this kind of awakening happen before. Chosen one. There was a time in my life when someone close to me thought a story about what I wanted to do that wasn't true. For a long time, I tried to clear up the misunderstanding, but the more I talked, the more it seemed to change into something else. In the end, I gave up trying to defend myself. I remember sitting quietly one night and praying, God, you know the truth. Let the truth speak when the time is right. Months later, that person came to me with tears in their eyes. They said they had begun to notice things they had previously overlooked. They understood that the story they thought was true didn't fit with how I really lived my life, and at that moment, everything changed in the relationship. It wasn't because I forced the truth to come out. It was because the truth came out on its own. You are getting close to that kind of moment now. The person who used to doubt you is starting to see how good you are. They are starting to see that even though people were making accusations, your life quietly showed patience, honesty, and kindness. You can't fake that kind of consistency for very long. In the end, it reveals every lie that has been told about it. Chosen one. When someone starts to see you clearly after years of distortion, they don't just feel bad about it, It is respect. They start to admire the strength you showed during the storm. They know that if they were in your shoes, they might not have handled the situation as well as you did. That acknowledgement shifts the dynamic among individuals. The same family member who used to feel comfortable questioning your motives now feels humble when they think about you. They are starting to understand that you were quietly going through pain that would have broken many people while they were listening to the accusations. They see that your silence wasn't empty, it was being disciplined, chosen one. This is the start of something holy. The heart that used to judge you is now getting softer. The mind that used to doubt you is now thinking about everything it thought it knew. This doesn't mean that all of the details from the past will suddenly go away, but it does mean that the misunderstanding's base is falling apart. When a lie's base falls apart, the space it leaves behind is a chance for truth to build something new. The change that is happening right now is more than just emotional, it is religious. Heaven is letting someone who didn't understand you see who you really are. And once that witness is clear, the way they talk about you will start to change from now on.